federal character, catchment area, and then we started with the political arrangement of the 6th zone, something that has not worked. So basically, everything has come to a head, and you find nuances coming out of this. We have true federalism, which represents a condemnation of over-centralization. So we have a backlash to that in decentralization. And then you have another aspect of it called devolution. And then you have another aspect of it called, disintegration. And then the extreme is secession. And all of it has been put in the baggage of reconstruction.
So what do we make of this situation now? Because the restructuring agenda is just so loud everywhere. In whose best interest? Because you did say that it must have been misconstrued at some point. In whose best interest is this restructuring happening? Should we have a referendum, for instance, to actually know who wants this restructuring?
I think the first thing to do is to really define what we mean by restructuring. What's the content? What is in this restructuring for Nigerians? And let's also define the modalities for the implementation and a time frame for it. We can start by even the reports that have come out. We had the National Political Reform Conference under President Obasanjo, and then we had the National Conference. All these came with recommendations. The 7th National Assembly came with constitutional amendments that were vetoed by President Jonathan. The 8th Assembly is going on with constitutional, amendment under the radar because nobody really knows what these people are doing because they have not so popularized it. You have not brought even the content of what you have come out to the public as to be covering it in all the, So we have a parallel system of constitutional amendment and political discourse that is also supposed to go with it. Don't forget that we practice constitutional federalism. So whether you call it devolution, true federalism and all that, you have to pass through the constitutional route. Because in actual constitutional sense, what is being demanded in federal terms is called rebalancing. Okay. You want to rebalance the configuration of your federal structure because it's not working. Let's face it, there are so many states now that cannot even pay salaries. For how long can we go on with this? Even the federal government is borrowing to do things. So definitely there is a crisis.
So restructuring will solve the problem?
The restructuring will address some of the issues, not solve all the problems. There are some. That's why I say we need to define what do we mean.
I'm curious because if we look at restructuring and say, okay, states begin to produce and sustain yourselves, and then you have some states that some people argue cannot even support themselves except they get the federal allocation. What becomes of those kind of states? Well,
basically, the whole concept of restructuring is to address some issues. So instead of the revenue going to the federal government, and don't forget that there's a lot of wastage in our system. The whole Nigerian federal system is hemorrhaging. Look at the corruption that has gone on. So these are issues that have to be addressed. If the resources are applied the way they ought to be applied, we deal with public finance issues, we deal with issues of law and governance and set an agenda that will address how this particular federal system is supposed to be rebalanced. So you talk about, look at Lagos State, for instance. How is it that Lagos State cannot control its waters without going through
That's another very controversial point.
Those are issues.
Could you speak to those who say, because, different voices and perspectives on this matter. What about the school of thought that suggests that if perhaps we fix the economy, we won't have so many people talking about, oh no, let's correct this imbalance? Does that make sense?
I think that is totally myopic. The call for balancing is as old as pre-independence. You must have heard about the Willink Commission. The agitation started way back that time by minorities. And that's what brought about these minority commissions. The Niger Delta Development Commission. They are rooted in that. So basically, the agitation for equity and balancing has been a feature of our constitutional federalism.
What comes to my mind now is that look, some of the conferences that we've had, even the most recent one, when it comes to those kind of issues, we saw how very contentious it turns. And then even in the National Assembly, while they were voting on this amendment of the Constitution, we saw how they threw away that particular part. So the big question is, how do we get to agree that something needs to be done first?
That's
before we
it.
even move